Welcome to a couple of bunkies.
Around 7 years ago, I overbuilt a coffee table for our house, making it out of 2x4s and 2x6s. About 3 years ago, we replaced this coffee table with one we built with our Maslow CNC. Check the video in the upper right hand corner. We decided to repurpose this coffee table and use it as a baby diaper changing table, housing and utilizing all of the supplies needed in order to make a happy baby. But I needed to create some legs first. And in order to fancy up this project just a tad, I wanted to go ahead and create a straight line jig for making tapered legs, similar to this one that Rockler has. Now I start making the tapered jig. I used some scrap melamine board left over from a previous project, and some scrap cherry that I had laying around. I made 2 miter rails out of 2 thin strips of cherry. I then cut the rails to the size of the sled. I then took the rail with some CA glue and accelerant and glued it to the very end of the sled, followed by brad nailing it into place. After making sure it fit perfectly, I carefully measured and marked the distance between the tracks, and repeating the process earlier with CA glue, accelerator, and the brad nailer. After some quick tests and adjustments, I had a fairly usable sled on my table saw. I then lifted the blade and cut into the sled, making sure to stop before going all the way through. I then squared up the sled with the table saw, and this is how the bottom ended up looking. I used a fairly large chunk of cherry and cut it to the size of the sled, and set it up to use it as the front fence, using the same CA glue and accelerator as earlier. I wanted this to be a little bit more robust, so I added wood screws to the sled's fence, making sure to countersink beforehand. I took another leftover piece of cherry, made some rough measurements on the angle that I wanted to achieve. I drilled the hole in the piece of wood and into the sled, and threaded it with a bolt, and added a wood screw at the angle that I desired. After I planed the cedar board, I cut it into 9-inch intervals with the table saw, and I go over all of the legs and square them up. After squaring up the future legs, I use the taper jig and immediately regretted setting it up for the table saw. But I went around all 4 sides on each leg and took the legs to the bandsaw to cut off the excess. At first attempting to use the same jig as earlier, but the distance between the blade and the fence was different. So I cut the excess by hand and cut the rest of the excess overshoot with the flush trim bit on the router table. Then switching out the flush trim bit with a round over bit to go over all of the edges. And the result looks like I almost bought it from a store. I repeated this process with the last 3 legs. I marked the center on all 4 legs and drilled the hole in each of them to fit the anchor that I had chosen. I installed the anchor in each of the 4 legs, and I used round T-nuts on the other side in order to install the legs. The next time I do something like this, I think I would rather use double-ended dowel screws. It would prevent me from having to drill multiple holes and use extra hardware.
I used a thin CA glue in order to lock it into place, and then used our favorite polyurethane, pecan polystain. And my wife decided to stop by in the shop, and I wanted to show her my new jig. It's a very simple thing to have tapered legs, but it really makes a difference. As always, I have applied 4 coats of polyurethane with sanding in between. I talked earlier about this 2x4 and 2x6 coffee table, where we added drawer slides to the top so we could store extra things around the house. I figured in this video I would go ahead and include a quick drawing of me designing it. This was done before we started YouTube or even thought about doing any of this. But from my experience, everybody loves a simple table to put together. And this one's a real monster that can hold a ton of weight. And here's where I add the new legs that I'm going to install today. But first I need to remove everything off of this coffee table and remove the furniture pads on the legs. I first marked center on all of the legs. Then I used a Forstner bit in order to countersink the T-nut. Then I used a smaller Forstner bit in order to drill a deeper and longer hole into the center of the other hole. Now it's time to install the T-nuts. And I used 3 Phillips screws in order to hold it into place. Now I just screw the legs into place. I do the same process on the other side and add some furniture pads. Since this is going to be a baby changing station, we no longer need the top of this coffee table. So goodbye hidden compartment. I feel that the legs turned out pretty nice, and it's still sturdy as it always was. The taper in the legs added just a little bit of style to this old farmhouse project. And here's the final result. Everything you need in order to change a baby, all in one spot. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and consider ringing the bell icon if you want notifications on upcoming videos.